Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Carrick Drone for a bit of Lizardmen against Dark Elf action. So playing as the Dark Elves, the one thing you really have to watch out for with the Lizards is the fact they can bring chameleon skinks and really kind of nuke down some of your squishier backline troops, deal with your shooting, all that sort of stuff. And with this composition, rather than kind of trying to counter it, rather than bring Dark Riders to try to shut them down and pursue them, I actually decided to bring a whole bunch of tanky troops, only a handful of squishies, such as the Witch Elves, and try to bait my opponent into shooting Malekith, who of course has monstrous physical resist, missile resist, and armor. So he actually has 25% missile resist, 20% physical, and 80 armor. So he's very, very tanky against their missiles, and just try to bait him, make him waste their ammo essentially, and rather than actually trying to counter him. So for my front line, I did bring 3 units of Blackguard and Agaron. These guys are very expensive, very elite anti-large infantry, but against the Lizardmen, they're incredibly potent because they have very high armor at 100. Lizardmen infantry isn't the best at dealing with armor. They have good weapon strength, great bonus against large, good melee defense. Melee attack of 36 is actually pretty solid, and will let them chop through infantry pretty good too. You can see a bonus versus large of 24 is just crazy. And they're immune to psychology, so a lot of the terror bombs that the Lizardmen kind of rely on are just not going to work against them. I do have them backed by 2 units of Blackguard Corsairs. These guys are simply there to help slice through infantry. They're not really kind of a core unit here. They're just there as a bit of a filler. In the backline, we do have Witch Elves to try to tie down enemy troops if they just try to push through or flank around or anything like that. The Witch Elves are always a nice unit to have, no matter what you're playing against. They're rather potent, of course, with their frenzy, their bonus versus infantry, and that Madness of Cain ability. Here in the back we do have 2 units of Cold One Knights, and these guys I think are actually very useful. They have not the greatest of speed, their armor's okay at 90, bronze shield, so nothing stellar in most of their stats, but they are cheap and they have armor piercing and anti-large. So if I'm forced to fight, for example, Krok-Gar, or forced to hunt down Stegodons, which my opponent did bring in the situation, they'll do very well. Over here you can see I did cast the Gaze of Malice on these chameleon skinks and have dove in right away with Malekith, just trying to get a few model picks, whittle them down, make them a little weaker. And my opponent does immediately respond with Krok-Gar, kind of booking it towards me, but I'll be able to get Malekith. I'll back up in the air before he gets there. Malekith's, as far as Malekith's spells go, I did bring Gaze of Malice, Stand Your Ground, Soul Stealer for the heals, Chill Wind for the slows, and then Power of Darkness just to regain some Winds of Magic reserves. On the dragons, the lords are generally pretty hard for the Lizardmen to shut down, since their anti-air options are really not the best. Finally, I do have a single unit of Shades with Great Swords, and these guys are pretty potent. They can chop through basically any infantry the Lizardmen bring, and they can also really gun down their big monsters, and that's kind of a dual role that I brought them for. And they also have stalk, of course, so they're not going to get jumped immediately by enemy troops. You can see that Malekith does get up into the sky. He just kind of pull away before my opponent can really do too much to him. The chameleon skinks here did lose about a dozen models, so definitely a little squishier, or definitely a little softened up. And you can see the first flight from the Shades does go in and starts whittling down the Stegodon, so definitely pretty potent there. The Blackguard do charge in. They're immediately slicing and dicing their way through the Stardust Warriors. Stardust Warriors, my opponent did bring a front line of 5 Stardust Warriors here. These guys are pretty solid, but once they start losing just lose their charge bonus, they're just not that potent. They don't have that much armor piercing. Obviously they still do have 16 armor piercing, but it's just not that much when you're forced to deal with Blackguard, so they will get whittled down over time. Over here you can see my opponent is kind of doing some damage. He does push Krok-Gar through, but I hit him with a Soul Steer and then charge him with Cold One Knights. And you can see the Cold One Knights with the backing of Stand Your Ground are actually chewing through Krok-Gar rather effectively. Of course, he will do immense damage to them because he is anti-large himself, but you can see they're just chipping away, bringing that HP lower and lower. Krok-Gar is definitely not having the best of days. He does cast a Hand of the Gods, plowing through the Witch Elves and doing huge amounts of work. But you can see, even with Cold-Blooded, he's being debuffed. He's lost his charge bonus, so he's not really able to deal with the Cold One Knights that way, and he's getting torn to shreds. Chameleon Skinks are trying to debuff him, but in the process they're going to be debuffing Krok-Gar as well, and making it harder for him to escape. Over here, Malekith is up in the sky, and I will be able to try to kind of pressure my opponent. On the flanks, my opponent does try to interfere with the Shades by dropping the Skink Priest of Heavens on him. The Skink Priest of Heavens is not a good melee combatant at all. You can see there he does throw the shade around, and he ends up splatting on the ground. But you can see he's just getting chopped up by the Shades, who of course have very solid melee stats. So despite the poison, they'll still do great work against him. Over here, the Blackguards with the Witch Elves is slowly but surely chipping away at the Stardust Warriors. They have been hit by Cold-Blooded, but that's only going to debuff their stats and make them easier victims. And this Feral Stegodons are rampaging, so they're just out of control and in a really bad spot against Cold One Knights, who are anti-large and armor piercing. And now my opponent's Krok-Gar didn't route too far, so he will be able to get him back into the fight. You can see some of my troops, like Blackguard Corsairs, have routed because they just don't have the best of morale. Skink Priest dying, getting pulled down into the pits here. And you can see I do cast another Gaze of Malice. The Gaze of Malice seems to be really ineffective against the chameleon skinks. There's such a dispersed sort of formation. The Chameleon Skinks over here do, however, bog down Malekith, and my opponent does charge in with Rockar, kind of gambling on his monsters and a large bonus to try to deal with Malekith. And at first, I kind of just try to bail out because I really don't have the best of faith in my ability to fight Rockar, but it doesn't quite work out. You can see Rockar is hot on my tail, doing a lot of damage, despite being debuffed by its own troops' poison. I decide to stand and fight. I pop Stand Your Ground, I pull my handful of Cold One Knights in, and we are going to drag Rockar into the pits here, no matter what he tries to do. Unfortunately, I didn't bring Word of Pain, so I can't debuff him a whole bunch and make him an easy victim, but we are able to just beat him down with the help of Malekith as well as the Cold One Knights. Over here in the meantime, the Black Corsairs have gone on the top of the Chameleon Skinks, who are hell-bent on killing Malekith, and with that, Crockar's going to be routed off, and he's going to be completely messed up. He will be able to outrun the Cold One Knights, I do believe, but he's just so low on HP that at this point he just doesn't have the ability to escape. So you can see the bar is still pretty even. My opponent's in front line, however, is buckled. He is whittling down these Shades, so I tried to get into melee against the Chameleon Skinks. Big mistake on my part. Shades are just not a cost-effective counter to Chameleon Skinks. But on the rest of the battlefield, you can see Malekith dealing with the Feral Stegodon here. My Cold One Knights kind of running him down. And slowly but surely, we're just destroying whatever's left of my opponent's troops. Committing troops like the Blackheart Corsairs to chasing after the Chameleon Skinks, just trying to get them off the field. And at this stage of the game, with your opponent's troops kind of broken and routing all over the place, it's really best to chase down fleeing troops as best you can. You can see here I'm trying to chase down these Sarsh Warriors, I'm trying to chase down these Sarsh Warriors with shields, using the Blackheart Corsairs mobility to run them down as sort of pseudo-cav, committing Cold One Knights to deal with the Sarsh Warriors, and sending these guys to deal with the Feral Stegodon, these guys to deal with the Sarsh Spears. Of course, these guys do cause fear, and dinos are susceptible to fear, so it's one of those nifty little perks. Over here, the Witch Elves do get into a fight with the Sarsh Warriors with shields, but I do dive in with Malekith, who will tear out them pretty quickly. Blackguard over here, you can see, are just tanking through all of this damage from Chameleon Skinks, who just do not have the missile damage to really deal with these guys. Sure, they're poisoning him. The Blackguard will never catch him, but the Chameleon Skinks can't do anything about him. And now you can see they are in the melee. They are getting focused down by 2 units of Chameleon Skinks, but slowly but surely they'll chip away. Malekith does dive down into the fight here, getting a lovely recharge on the Chameleon Skinks, and this is going to cause the fear and terror out of my opponent's entire army. So, a Pyrrhic victory for the Dark Elves. As you can see, some of the units here gain some immense chevrons. You can see Cold One Knights went up 3 chevrons, I do believe, in the course of that game, basically just through killing Crockar. And I think this is actually a pretty solid build. Now, obviously with this sort of composition, you are essentially gambling on the fact that you will tank through any shooting your opponent brings. This composition is not built around countering Chameleon Skinks. For example, Chameleon Skinks, if you bring, for example, a bunch of Dark Shards with shields, they can actually trade with the Chameleon Skinks somewhat effectively, because you are reducing their damage by 55% before armor's calculated, and you do outrange them by quite a bit. And despite their 40% missile resistance, Chameleon Skinks can still be gunned down with focus fire. It's one of those things I think people overestimate about them. They're definitely survivable, but not invincible. The Blackguard are just very tough nut to crack for the Lizardmen. Lizardmen don't really have a hard counter to Blackguard. They're even worse than the Tomb Kings in that sense, I think. Because Tomb Kings have Ushabti Great Bows. Lizardmen obviously do have the Stegodons with the Ballistas, but and the Solar Engines, but those are just not comparable to the Ushabti Great Bows. They're in a really, really tough spot against units that are immune to psychology, have a bonus versus large, and are armor piercing with great armor. The Lizardmen are just really poorly kitted out to deal with that. Otherwise, this comp I think is pretty solid, with the Witch Elves being good, the Blackheart Corsairs just helping mop up enemy troops, drive them off the field, Cold One Knights providing that extra bit of mass to just stop enemy troops trying to bust through your front line. They do have very solid stats. They can just pile in against a lot of troops. They brought those Feral Stegodons down. They brought Crockgar down after he expended his charge into the Blackguard. So just very useful. Malekith, decent Lord pick, I think. Not much to say there. Shades, I think, were a bit of a mistake. They were very expensive, and they didn't really deliver very much. I might have been better off bringing Dark Riders with the repeater crossbows. But nonetheless, it was worth a try, I think, and they definitely distracted the Chameleon Skinks and drew away their fire for a very long time. As far as my opponent's build goes, I think he should have tried to be casting more spells with Skink Priest of Beasts. He definitely, I don't think, got full value out of his caster in that game. He only brought Flock of Doom, which isn't the best against heavily armored infantry, which is the majority of his build. The Chameleon Skinks performed well, but I'm not sure 4 isn't. I think 4 might be a little bit of overkill. Generally, in my opinion, it's worth bringing Stegodons with the ballistas. Feral Stegodons have a kind of a problem with the fact that they just rampage, and if they rampage in the middle of Blackguard, they're just going to get destroyed. In this situation where I really didn't have much of a backline, there's not much for the Stegodons to target, I suppose, but definitely the fact that they just rampage was a huge problem for my opponent there. And I think it was definitely a bit of a waste. So in my opinion, ballistas are very good. You can chip away your opponent's troops. It's not as useful as against high elves where you're trying to break their martial prowess, but nonetheless, chipping away models before the fight happens is very useful. Lore of Heavens Increased, I think, is very good, simply because you can nuke your opponent down with things like Wind Blast. So I think there's definitely better options when you're dealing with the Dark Elves. Nonetheless, definitely not a terrible build either. I think it's trying to counter those. It's just that those blackguards are really hard to shut down, and I just had a lot of armor-piercing anti-Lars in this build. And those Chameleon Skinks were just brutal. So definitely good game to my opponent. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below to leave it just to keep up with additional content. If you have any comments, criticism, anything like that, that you'd like to share, be sure to post it down below, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.